Assalamu alaikum, adab, good morning, namaskar, sat sri akal. My name is Sayyid Qaswar Abbas. Today I'm going to talk about UNO Sustainable Development Goal number 10, reduce inequalities. Reduce inequality within and among countries. Definition and explanation. Inequalities in income and wealth are severe and have been widening globally. The richest 1% of the world's population now control approximately up to 43.4% of global assets. Global Wealth Report 2020. The wealth share of the global top 10% was 80.3% in mid 2020, while most alarmingly, the poorest half owns just 1%. Global Wealth Report 2014, and have been impacted the most due to COVID. Inequality emerged as a central issue for the Sustainable Development Goals because of the growing body of evidence that inequalities in income and wealth cause economic instability, a range of health and social problems, and create a roadblock to the adoption of pro environment strategies and behavior. Social and economic inequalities tear the social fabric, undermine social cohesion, contribute to environmental problems, and prevent nations, communities, and individuals from flourishing. Record increase in global household wealth, still widening inequality. Pre-COVID times. As per Credit Suisse Global Wealth Report 2014, in 2008, the United Nations University and World Institute for Development Economic Research estimated that the Gini coefficient for global wealth inequalities, an index ranging from 0, that is complete equality, to 1, that is total inequality, was at 0.89. Put another way, this is the value you would obtain in a population of 10 people if one person had $1,000 and the other 9 had only $1 each. It is hardly surprising then that the countries most likely to meet 17 SDGs first are Sweden, Norway, Denmark, and Finland, according to a report published in 2014. The Nordics have the highest level of equality in the world. The regional distribution of wealth. The distinctive regional pattern of wealth ownership may be seen by comparing the share of household wealth of each region with its share of adult population. North America is the region with the highest average wealth. It is also the region with the largest share of total wealth, that is 34.7%. Although Europe's greater population means that its wealth share, that is 32.4%, is only slightly lower. The 18.9% share of wealth held in Asia Pacific countries, excluding China and India, is not far from population share of the region, that is 23.7%. Elsewhere, the disparity between population and wealth become increasingly apparent. Despite making enormous strides in recent years, China accounts for 21.4% of the adult population of the world, yet only 8.1% of global wealth. The ratio is similar to Latin America, 8.4% to 3.5%. But for America and India, the population share exceeds the wealth share by a multiple of more than 10. Global Wealth Report 2020. The wealth trend in this century. Household wealth has grown at a significant pace this century. Using current USD exchange rates, total household wealth rose from USD 117.9 trillion dollars in 2000 to 399.2 trillion at end 2019, averaging 6.6% growth per annum. Allowing for population growth, wealth per adult also grew rapidly by 8.5% to reach US dollars 77,309, another all-time high. Every region recorded notable gains in both total wealth and wealth per adult, with Africa, China, and North America leading the way. Post COVID times. In 2020, reductions in GDP throughout the world and lower growth prospects in the future had the anticipated consequences for household wealth during January to March 2020. Stock markets felt everywhere, often significantly. Among 35 countries with financial balance sheet data, 27 experienced a decline in household net financial wealth, and four, Denmark, Australia, United States, and Canada, recorded losses above 9%. For the world as a whole, the report estimated that total household wealth dropped by US 17.5 trillions between January and March, as 4.4% decrease compared to the value at the end of 2019. Roughly two-thirds of this is due to currency depreciation against the US dollar. There has been massive economic support for governments involving the transfer of many trillions of US dollars from the government sector to the private sector and ultimately to household. These support mechanisms are temporary, of course. Emergency measures are being phased out, and interest rates will need to rise again at some point. Furthermore, it seems likely that the governments will seek to recover some of the increased expenditure via higher taxation in future. This, together with reduced GDP prospects, will hamper growth of household wealth for several years ahead. Wealth prospects in near future. The immediate economic outlook is highly uncertain. There is little agreement on how GDP will evolve. Even for the most important economies, stock markets are likely to perform in unpredictable ways, and exchange rates may be volatile as well. Household debt is a big unknown, possibility falling if consumers' spending habits are constrained, or rising if those suffering most from the consequences of the pandemic borrow to cover their day to day needs. Perhaps the biggest question mark concerns the medium term actions of the government faced by faced by a conflict between support for economies in stress and repayment of the debt incurred in dealing with the consequences of the pandemic. For the world as a whole, average wealth is likely to remain flat for rest of 2020, ending up a fraction 0.6% below the starting level for the year. Wealth growth may resume in 2021, but at a slowish pace equivalent to 3.4 per annum. At this rate, growth will have averaged 1.4% over the 2 years period 2020 to 2021, well down from the rates achieved in recent years. Wealth inequalities. Pandemic has exacerbated economic disparities across the globe. Oxfam reports that from March 18 to the end of 2020, global billionaire wealth increased by $3.9 trillion dollars. By contrast, global workers' combined earnings fell by $3.7 trillion dollars, according to the International Labour Organization, as millions lost their jobs around the world. Household wealth is very unevenly distributed, and this shows up in multiple ways. Geographical imbalance is evident in the fact that at the end of 2019, North America and Europe accounted for 55% of the total global wealth, but only 17% of the world adult population. In contrast, the population share was three times the wealth share in Latin America, four times the wealth share in India, and nearly 10 times the wealth share in Africa. Wealth differences within countries are even more pronounced. The top 1% of wealth holders in a country typically own 25 to 40% of all wealth, and the top 10% usually account for 55 to 75%. At the end of 2019, as stated earlier, the figure indicate that millionaires around the world, which number exactly 1% of the adult population, accounted for 43.4% of global net worth. In contrast, the 54% of adults with wealth below US dollar 10,000 together mustered less than 2% of the global wealth. The pandemic will have important repercussions on income distribution. Although emergency benefits in high income countries offset the effect of some extent, high unemployment and reduced economic activity will almost certainly increase income inequality within countries since they tend to affect those with lower income disproportionately. International income differences may also rise as the pandemic spreads more through the third world, where governments have less resources to cushion the impact on household income. Other effects, for example, reduced remittances from the family members working abroad, will worsen impacts. Increased income inequality will feed through to wealth distribution via effects on saving and borrowing. But the overall impact of the pandemic on wealth inequality is less clear, since a number of factors are at play. Broadly speaking, reduced incomes for low wealth families are likely to increase wealth inequality, both within countries and for the world as a whole. Five reasons why we need more equality. A. Health. Life expectancy is shorter and mortality rates are higher in more unequal societies. This applies to both the poor and perhaps surprisingly also to the rich in these societies. Rates of infant mortality, mental illness, and obesity are also 2 to 4 times higher. In more unequal developing and developed countries, HIV infection prevalence rates are higher. B. Social relationships. Levels of social cohesion, including trust and social capital, are lower in more unequal societies. Indicators of women's status and equality also tend to be worse. More unequal societies have more property crimes and violence, especially homicides. C. Human capital development. Scores on the UNICEF Index of Child Well-being are significantly worse in unequal countries and decline as inequality rises. Maths and literacy scores are also lower, and more young people drop out of education, unemployment, and training, and more teenage girls become mothers. Social mobility is restricted by inequality. Equality of opportunity is increased by greater equality of outcomes. More equal countries tend to have higher rates of innovation, probably because of greater social mobility. D. Economic progress and stability. Poverty reduction is compromised by income inequality. The International Monetary Fund states that reducing inequality and bolstering long term economic growth may be two sides of the same coin. In rich and poor countries, inequality is strongly correlated with shorter spells of economic expansion and less growth over time. Inequality is associated with more frequent and more severe boom and bust cycles that make economies more volatile and vulnerable to crisis. E. Sustainable economies. Inequality drives status competition, which drives personal debt and consumerism. More equal societies promote the common good. They recycle more, spend more on foreign aid, score higher on the Global Peace Index. Business leaders in more equal countries rate international environmental agreements more highly. Inequities between countries are impairing cooperation between nations and the development of international environmental agreements on climate change. Islamic perspective on inequality. Allah Almighty says, but is it they who distribute thy sustainers grace? Nay, as it is we who distribute their means of livelihood among them in the life of this world and raise some of them by degrees above others, to the end that they might avail themselves of one another's help. So too it is we who bestow gifts of the Spirit upon whomever we will. and this thy sustainers grace is better than all the worldly wealth that they may amass. Holy Quran 43-32. This verse makes it very clear that Allah Almighty has created inequality purposefully, and one of the important purposes is that it makes us need one another so that we can help one another. This puzzles modern minds who are used to thinking of poverty as an evil which must be combated and destroyed. This modern line of thinking that poverty is a social evil also appears to be supported by many verses of the Quran and other Islamic source materials which strongly urge the feeding of the poor and describe our collective social responsibilities in providing for the basic needs of all the members of the society. On the one hand, Allah has created poverty and inequality for a purpose, and on the other hand, it appears that He is urging us to remove these characteristics from society. To explain the Islamic viewpoint regarding the understanding of inequality and poverty, however, achieving this goal requires a detour through the history of Western intellectual developments, which led to modern ways of thinking about poverty now dominant throughout the world. In the idea of poverty, Gertrude uh, Himmelfarb 1984 has documented how poverty ceased to be the natural condition and became a social problem in early stages of the Industrial Revolution. While it is true that poverty has been nearly universally present, ideas about poverty have undergone a radical transformation. While modern minds shaped by market societies see poverty as an obvious evil which must be eliminated to improve social welfare, pre-modern thought accepted poverty as a natural phenomena and did not attach any stigma to it. Indeed, in medieval Europe, poverty was honored and idealized, and stigma was attached to wealth and the wealthy. The Bible, the Bible states that blessed are the poor, Matthew 5-3, New International Version. And Christian monks who took vows of poverty were honored for living this ideal. Similarly, the Bible states that the love of wealth is the source of all evil. For the love of money is a root of all kinds of evil. Timothy 6-10. Paradoxically, we can find Islamic source materials to support both viewpoints. The pre modern view of poverty as honorable and wealth as evil, as well as the opposite view of poverty as evil and wealth as blessing. Modern Islamic thought has been shaped by the experience of living in market societies which spread throughout the world as a result of the European conquest and colonization of the globe. One way to remove the blinders created by this experience is to study the historical process of transition from traditional to market societies. It is only after going back to the pre modern conception of society as an organic whole that we can resolve these paradoxes and realize that there is perfect harmony between the social imperative of struggling to remove poverty and the fact that poverty and inequality serve many useful social purposes. A traditional society has many mechanisms which work to alleviate the suffering that can be caused by poverty. A. Religion teaches men to be content with their lot in this world and strive to achieve the felicity of the hereafter. In particular, Islamic teachings ask the poor not to envy the rich and the rich not to flaunt their wealth. Also, conspicuous consumption is prohibited by Islam. Instead, the rich are strongly encouraged to give from their excess wealth to the poor. B. Natural human tendencies for compassion and generosity lead those with access to support those in need. C. Social institutions are created to provide systematically for the poor. In Europe, there were many such church based organizations. In Islamic countries, the Waqf provided systematic support and shaped the fabric of Islamic societies. The creation of the labor market required for the function of modern capitalism necessitates several changes in attitudes towards poverty. First, capitalists employ labor which creates less differences given the boss's superiority and making laborers inferior. Second, the production process is not considered as a joint enterprise for the provision of services to the society. Instead, it is an enterprise to make profits for the capitalist, often at the expense of society. Exploitation of laborers increases profits and hence is one of the key component of the capitalism. This creates alienation and anomie since labor is no longer engaged in socially meaningful work. Instead, he sells his services out of the necessity of earning a living. Finally, in order to prevent revolutions, capitalism also requires the laborers to believe in the necessity of their enslavement and exploitation. This is accomplished by the educational processes which create numerous mythical justifications. One of these is the famous production function, according to which laborers receive their marginal product while capitalists receive their marginal product so that each receives a just payment for their share of the product. In addition, economic theory shows that firms earn no excess profits so that no demands can be made by laborers for a just and equitable share in the profits of the firm. In a reality ignored by the textbooks, big corporations make trillions of dollars of profits. If these were distributed justly, the major deprivations of poverty could easily be eliminated, but at the cost of lowering corporate profits. Whereas poverty is a natural phenomenon in traditional society, it is a serious social problem in market economies that emerged after the Industrial Revolution created the possibility of large scale production. Once the poor are deprived of all the pillars of support available to them in a traditional society, informed that they are responsible for their own condition and offered no hope of a better life in the hereafter, so they will naturally create social unrest. Polanyi, 1944, chapter 3, describes how enclosures of land caused a large scale uprooting of small peasants aching a living off the land and created a labor force which could be used as fodder for the satanic mills at the heart of the Industrial Revolution. Poverty as a social problem came into being for the first time during this period. And as capitalism has spread across the planet, it has carried the labor market and poverty along with itself. The cures for the problem lie in dimensions radically different from those which can be conceived in capitalist societies. The spiritual dimension. Islamic worldview is radically different from that created and fostered by market societies in which we currently live. This worldview came as a stranger and created a revolution. Arabs living in a primitive society absorbed this message and became leaders of the world. They created a vibrant civilization which lasted for more than 1,000 years, enriching the lives of all on the planet. Over the past few centuries, decay and degeneration has set in within the Islamic civilization, while primitive European tribes acquired civilization and weapons and came to dominate the globe. As a result of the great transformation which took place in Europe, modern society is based on radically different principles from those of traditional societies and especially of Islamic societies. An Islamic approach to poverty and inequality cannot be applied as band aids to a radically different social, political, and economic system. The revolutionary approach of Islam requires a revolutionary framework to implement. The Islamic response to problems created by inequality and poverty is crafted along three dimensions: spiritual, social, and institutional. A central and core element of Islamic approach is that this world is a trial and that the results of this trial will be seen in the afterlife. All our struggles on this earth are purely for the sake of Allah. Say, lo, my worship and my sacrifice and my living and my dying are for Allah, Lord of the worlds. Quran, Ayah 6-162. The Quran provides us with guidance on how to carry out this struggle so that we can achieve the success in the hereafter. The Prophet Muhammad, may the peace and blessings of Allah be upon him, was sent as a messenger and as a model of excellence in behavior, so that we would have a practical demonstration of the ways of living required and preferred by Allah. For convenience, we mention four principles related to wealth which we need to learn to achieve spiritual progress. A. Learning indifference to wealth. B. Learning generosity and compassion. C. According dignity and equality to the poor. D. Learning moderation in living and giving. A. Learning indifference to wealth and luxury. One of the central Islamic teaching with respect to wealth, in common with all other religious traditions, is the cultivation of indifference to wealth. It is not wealth itself which is undesirable, rather it is attachment to or love of wealth which is deadly. Spiritual progress occurs when we cleanse the heart of the love of material possessions and replace this by the love of God. This point is clarified in several source materials in the Quran and the Ahadith. The Quran states that success in the hereafter depends on our loving Allah Almighty, His Prophet, may the peace and blessings of Allah be upon him, and His deen, religion, more than all our material possessions. Say, if your fathers and your sons and your brethren and your wives and your tribe and the wealth ye have acquired and merchandise for which ye fear that there will be no sale, and dwellings ye desire are dearer to you than Allah and His Messenger, and striving in His way, then wait till Allah bringeth His command to pass. Allah guideth not wrongdoing folk. Quran 9-24. Depending on the state of spiritual progress, wealth can be a blessing or a curse. As the Quran states, both wealth and poverty are trials and not markers of the pleasure or displeasure of God. Now, as for man, his Lord trieth him, giving him honor and gift, then saith he, puffed up, my Lord hath honored me. But when he trieth him, restricting his subsistence for him, then saith he in despair, my Lord hath humiliated me. Quran 89-15 and 16. Failure in the trial by wealth occurs if we become arrogant or proud or feel that we deserve the wealth due to our merits or skills. This feeling of entitlement was expressed by Qarun. This wealth has been given to me only by virtue of the knowledge that is in me. Quran 28-78. Instead, the Quran teaches us that all dominion belongs to Allah alone, and He gives from this to whosoever He wishes. Any wealth that we have is a gift of Allah, and we should give to others out of the bounties that Allah Almighty has given to us. Qarun is reminded to do good unto others as God has done good unto thee. Quran ayat 28-77. If possession of wealth makes us feel gratitude to Allah and we follow the rules of the Sharia in acquiring and spending wealth in the path of Allah, then wealth is a great blessing. If instead we become proud and arrogant due to this wealth, then wealth can cause great harm to our spiritual development and to others. The Quran states that the wealth can cause some to become rebellious, and if Allah were to enlarge the provision for His slaves, they would surely rebel in the earth. But He sendeth down by measure as He willeth. Lo, He is informed a seer of his bondmen. Quran 42-27. The love of wealth and luxury has been built into the heart of the men. Spiritual progress occurs when we learn to reduce or eliminate this love, which corrupts our hearts, and replace it with the love of Allah. His Prophet, may the peace and blessings of Allah be upon him, and his deen, this is known as tazkiyah, cleaning and purification of heart. Struggling against problems created by inequality and poverty leads to this kind of spiritual progress. If we give away the things we love most to the poor, this will reduce our love of material possessions and will also create sympathy and consideration for the poor. Both of these are characteristics of soft hearts which are required of believers. Learning moderation in lifestyles. Islamic teachings place stress on living in a simple lifestyle. For example, O children of Adam, wear your beautiful apparel at every time and place of prayer. Eat and drink freely, but waste not by excess, for Allah loveth not the wasters. Quran, ayah 7-31. The verse clarifies that Islam does not require us to be ascetics. We can eat and drink and wear beautiful clothes. Similarly, Allah states that, say, who has forbidden the beautiful gifts of God which He has produced for His servant, in tayyibat, things clean and pure, which He has provided for sustenance. Quran, ayah 7-32. At the same time, we must display moderation in consumption and not indulge in excess or wasteful spending, israf and tabdir. Verily, spendthrifts are brothers of the shaitan, Satans, and the shaitan, Satan, is to his Lord ungrateful. Quran 17-27. In particular, we should not lead luxurious lifestyles or seek to emulate them. Modern conventional approaches based on contemporary theories do not take into account these spiritual dimensions. As a result, these approaches are seriously deficient on many fronts. Welfare and happiness do not come from external circumstances but from cultivating good characteristics. For instance, the poor are commanded not to envy the rich. Quran, ayah 4-32, and not to seek to emulate their lifestyles. Quran 9-55. There is a hadith to the effect that true richness is contentment of the heart. Al Bukhari 1422H 895, hadith number 6446. As a means to happiness, the pursuit of wealth turns out to be an illusion, as the Quran, ayah 3185 states. Learning generosity and compassion. A central element in the Islamic approach to poverty and inequality is the cultivation of the character trait of generosity. For instance, Allah commands justice, the doing of good, and generosity to fellow men. Quran 16-90. There are more than 100 verses of the Quran which encourage generosity, giving to others for the sake of the love of Allah, and discourage and condemn miserliness and stinginess. In addition to encouragement, promises of multiplied rewards, exhortations, and recommendations, the Quran provides us with the tools to cleanse our hearts of the love of the wealth. But as for you, O believers, never shall you attain to true piety unless you spend on others out of what you cherish yourselves, and whatever you spend. Verily, God has full knowledge thereof. Quran 3-92. By spending or giving away our prized possessions, we will reduce the love of material goods in our hearts, and we will increase our sympathy and compassion for others. The Quran states that people of piety spend on others to purify their own hearts. He who gives from his wealth to purify himself. Quran 92-18. The Quran recommends the Prophet Muhammad, may the peace and blessings of Allah be upon him, as the ideal model for our behavior. The generosity of our Prophet Muhammad, may the peace and blessings of Allah be upon him, is well known. He never turned away anyone who sought his help. It is narrated by Ibn Abbas that Prophet, may the peace and blessings of Allah be upon him, was the most generous of all the people, and he used to become more generous in Ramadan when Jibril alayhi salam, met him. Jibril used to meet him every night during Ramadan to revise the Quran with him. Allah's Messenger, may the peace and blessings of Allah be upon him, then used to be more generous than the fast wind. Al-Bukhari 1422H 1-8 Hadith number 6. The Prophet, may the peace and blessings of Allah be upon him, had compassion, concern, and mercy. Indeed, there has come unto you, O mankind, an apostle from among yourselves, heavily weighs upon him the thought that you might suffer. Full of concern for you is he, and full of compassion and mercy towards the believers. Quran 9-128. He was mercy to all mankind, not just the believers. Quran 21-107. The Quran chides him, saying, "Do not kill yourself with sorrow on behalf of those who do not believe in your message." Quran 18-6. This shows his extreme compassion and sympathy for the suffering of others, including even animals. The solution to the problems of poverty lies in emulating the examples of Umar Farooq, may Allah be pleased with him, who was eating coarse bread. When asked why, he said that he felt embarrassed to eat refined bread when not everyone in the Ummah could afford to eat it. Ibn al-Sari 1985 2-2364. If the wealthy consider this wealth to be a responsibility and a trust which has been given to them because of the poor, then they will recognize the rights of the poor in their wealth. Instead of flaunting their wealth in the face of the poor, they will share excess wealth and Islamic approach to inequality and poverty with those in need. These are essential and core elements in the Islamic approach to poverty, which have no counterparts in the Western approaches. Learning to respect and honor piety alone. Dignity, honor, and respect are to be accorded to the person as per his or her degree of closeness to Allah, piety or taqwa, and not by conventional standards of wealth and standing in the community. When judging two people, the Prophet Muhammad, may the peace and blessings of Allah be upon him, taught the companions that the poor and socially inferior person with taqwa had more dignity and honor in the eyes of Allah than a planet full of rich and rebellious persons derived from Al-Bukhari 1422H 8-95 Hadith number 6447. The Quran also affirms that, O mankind, we created you from a single pair of a male and a female, and made you into nations and tribes, that ye may know each other, not that ye may despise each other. Verily, the most honor of you in the sight of Allah is He who is the most righteous of you. Quran, ayah 49-13. Islam creates a radical and revolutionary change in perspective. Throughout Islamic history, scholars and Sufis have been accorded far greater honor, popularity, and respect than that commanded by the wealthy and the powerful. However, these values are undergoing change in Islamic societies currently due to the powerful onslaught of modernity. Providing the poor with lives of dignity and honor is central to the Islamic approach to dealing with poverty and inequality. The rich are told to give to the poor without offending their dignity. Quran 2-262. They are also told that they have been given their wealth by Allah because of the poor among them, and also that poor are entitled to a share of their wealth. Quran 70-24. Those who have in excess of their needs are given the responsibility to take care of those with less. Furthermore, the poor are told to conceal their needs and ask only from Allah, while the rich are told to seek out the needy and help them. Quran 2-273. The social dimensions. Whereas economists have understood poverty to be merely a lack of money, recent research has established that poverty is a multidimensional phenomena which cannot be addressed simply by throwing money at it. The inner spiritual dimension has been addressed in the previous section. In this section, we will discuss how Islam addresses the issues of inequality and poverty in context of the social dimension. Islam places heavy emphasis on the unity, brotherhood, and love of humanity as the basis of building a society. This naturally leads to the creation of well knit communities. At the heart of society is love and compassion for all humanity, embodied in the character of our Prophet Muhammad. May the peace and blessings of Allah be upon him. This is the base on which the ties of kinship and community are forged, and the Ummah is united for the purpose of seeking the welfare of all humanity. These four levels are discussed below. Mercy to the nations. A. At the core of building any society is the love that binds the member together. The Prophet Muhammad, may the peace and blessings of Allah be upon him, was sent as a perfect model to provide a living illustration of ideal behavior in this regard. As the Quran states, we have not sent thee except as a mercy to all creation. Quran ayat 21-107. The Quran testifies to the compassion of the Prophet, may the peace and blessings of Allah be upon him, saying, grievous is your suffering to him. Quran 9-128. It also testifies to the pain felt by the Prophet, may the peace and blessings of Allah be upon him, on the behalf of all mankind, as they would come to a bad end if they did not heed his warning and accept his glad tidings. Perhaps you would kill yourself through grief over them. O Muhammad, if they do not believe. Quran 18-6. He is reminded that he is not responsible for their guidance and that he has fulfilled his duty to convey the message in the best ways, with kindness, courtesy, and respect. The entire Ummah, the group of Muslims, is told to follow his example in this regard. The Muslims are charged with the responsibility of taking the message of God to all. This message includes the brotherhood of man and the necessity of loving all human beings as our brothers. As stated in Hadith, the believer loves and is loved. Al-Shabani 2001 15-107, Hadith number 9198. Al-Tabarani 1995 658, Hadith number 5787. Community. Close ties with family, kinfolk, and strong neighborhood communities are essential building blocks of Islamic societies. These are also the most important tools which protect against difficulties arising from inequalities and poverty. The keys to building community are forged in the bosom of a warm and loving family, where the children are nourished, nurtured, and trained to overcome selfish tendencies and fulfill social obligations. The Prophet Muhammad, may the peace and blessings of Allah be upon him, was a model of love, kindness, as well as respect for children, and placed great emphasis on these equalities, saying that those who do not love children are not from us. See Al-Tirmidhi 1975 4-321, Hadith number 1919. It is this love and nurturing received by children in their families which creates the strong bond of kinship, which receives extreme importance in Islamic teachings. We are told to make connections with family even though they may cut ties with us. Good treatment towards kin, regardless of whether or not they are Muslims, is prioritized. Quran has many verses detailing and emphasizing the rights of the extended family. For instance, and worship Allah and do not associate anyone with him, and do good to the parents and to relatives and orphans and the needy and the near neighbors, relatives, and the distant neighbor, non-relatives, and the companion of your side and the wayfarer. Quran 4-36. Growing out ties to the family comes the second natural community, which is the neighborhood. Close ties with neighbors are an essential component of Islam. The rights of neighbors were emphasized so much that the Prophet Muhammad, may the peace and blessings of Allah be upon him, stated that he thought the neighbors might be given the right to inherit our properties. Al-Bukhari 1422H 8-10 Hadith 61:4. The Holy Prophet, may the peace and blessings of Allah be upon him, stated that man has not believed in me who sleeps contentedly while his neighbor sleeps hungry. Al-Tabarani 1994 1-259 Hadith number 751. Similarly, he also stated, do you know what are the rights of neighbors? Help them when they need your help. Give them loans if they need are poor. Spend upon them if they are sick. Visit them if they are happy. Greet them, and if they are sad, share their sorrow. If they die, participate in their funeral. I swear in the name of the one in whose custody is my life. No one fully fulfills the rights of neighbors except very few among you upon whom Allah showers His mercy. Al-Bihaqi 2003 12-14 Hadith number 9113. Similarly, Zainul Abidin Ali bin al-Hussein in his Risalat al-Haqooq said, these are your duties towards your neighbors. Protect his interests when he is absent. Show him respect when he is present. Help him when he is inflicted with any injustice. Do not remain on the lookout to detect his faults, and if by any chance you happen to know any undesirable thing about him, hide it from the others, and at the same time try to desist him from improper habits, if there is any chance that he will listen to you. Never leave him alone at any calamity. Forgive him if he has done any wrong. In short, live with him a noble life based on the highest Islamic ethical code. Islamic teachings tell us to fulfill our social responsibilities so that those with excess wealth take care of those in need. As long as wealth circulates freely within the community as commanded by Quran, inequalities and poverty are social lubricants which are helpful in creating communities. Ummah, Islamic teachings lay heavy stress on uniting the hearts of the Muslims and on creating a community of believers. And verily, this community of yours is one single community. Since I am the sustainer of you all, remain then conscious of me. Quran 23-52. Warring tribes with deep enmities embedded in century old traditions were united as brothers by the advent of Islam and hold fast all together by the rope which Allah stretches out for you, and be not divided among yourselves, and remember with gratitude Allah's favor on you, for ye were enemies and he joined your hearts in love, so that by his grace ye become brethren. Quran 3-103. According to Hadith, this ummah is like one body. If any part is hurt, the whole body feels the pain. Al-Bukhari 1422H 810 Hadith number 6011. This creation of unity, of the sense of mutual responsibility for each other, is central to Islamic concepts for solving the problems of the weak and oppressed. The provision of basic needs to all is the collective responsibility of the Ummah as a whole. In particular, education, health, and social welfare of all the children in the Ummah are our collective responsibility. Collective responsibility, fard al-kifaya, is discharged by everyone participating in doing their own share. Thus, every local neighborhood community takes care of its members, families take care of their own, and those with excess take care of those who do not have sufficient means. Historically, for over 1,000 years, these functions were performed superbly in the Islamic civilization using a collection of institutions motivated by the desire of earnings in the hereafter. Education was freely available to all who sought it. See Shalabai 1954. The concept of charging money for health and education, natural to the market economy, was alien to an Islamic approach to inequality and poverty. Those with knowledge were given the responsibility to convey this treasure to those without. People learned the skills of health sciences in order to earn the reward promised in Quran, that he who saves a life, it is as if he has saved the whole world. Quran 5-32. The money required for these functions was made available by a variety of private and public means, fueled by the strong Islamic injunctions for generosity and charity. Humanity. The message of Quran is addressed to humanity as a whole. O mankind, we created you from a single pair of male and a female, made you into nations and tribes that you may know each other. Verily, the most honored of you in the sight of God is he who is the most righteous of you. Quran 49-13. The Prophet Muhammad, may the peace and blessings of Allah be upon him, is described as the mercy of God to all of the creations. Quran 21-107. Despite appearances to the contrary, created both by media and by certain extremist groups of the Muslims, the central message of Islam is not to unite Muslims against the non Muslims. Quite the contrary, the message of Islam is to unite all of the humanity under the banner of the best ideals and the common heritage of mankind. You have become the best of communities raised for the benefit of mankind. Quran 3-110. Historian Marshall Hodgson 2009 has expressed the effects of this injunction to create welfare for mankind in the following terms. Soon after the founding of the faith, Muslims succeeded in building a new form of society, which in time carried with it its own distinctive institution, its art and literature, its science and scholarship, its political and social forms, as well as its cult and creed, all bearing an unmistakable Islamic impress. In the course of centuries, this new society spread over widely diverse climes throughout most of the old world. It came closer than any had ever come to uniting all mankind under its ideals. Page 71. The tolerance, open mindedness, and lack of prejudice in Islamic civilization has been attested to by numerous authors. There is no compulsion in religion, and Muslims are told that they only have the duty to carry the message to others. It is not for thee, O Prophet, to make people follow the right path, since it is God alone who guides whom He wills. Quran 2-272. The unique live and let live attitude of the Quran is embodied in several verses and in the lives of the Prophet Muhammad. May the peace and blessings of Allah be upon him and his companions. For instance, the Quran states, Verily, those who have attained to faith in this divine writ, as well as those who follow the Jewish faith and the Christian and the Sabians, all who believe in God and last day and do righteous deeds shall have their reward with their sustainer, and no fear need they have, and neither shall they grieve. Quran 2-62. The effects of these teachings of broad minded tolerance, of the equality and brotherhood of man, are evident throughout the history of Islamic civilization. For instance, Maria Rosa Menocal 2002 describes how the Muslim rulers of Spain created a culture of tolerance in Spain, where Christian and Jewish scholars, philosophers, and religious authorities freely intermingled and enriched society by their diverse contributions. Similarly, historian Arnold Toynbee, 1948, writes that the extinction of race consciousness as between Muslims is one of the outstanding achievements of Islam. And in the contemporary world, there is, as it happens, a crying need for the propagation of this Islamic virtue. Page 205. The impact of these radical teachings of universal brotherhood of man, our responsibilities for excellence in conduct, equality, continue to reverberate throughout the world. See, for example, the Enlightenment Quran by Al Marsafi 2009. which documents the tremendous impact of the translation of the Quran on the leading Enlightenment philosophers in Europe. Similarly, Spellberg 2013 documents the effects that Thomas Jefferson's reading of Quran had on the framing of US Constitution, institutional and regulatory dimension. Spiritual and social arrangement must be supplemented by complementary institutional and legal framework in order to have an effective impact on real world problems. In the past, Islamic societies created a rich fabric of institutional structure to take care of problems related to social welfare. Secular societies framed around the concept of conflicting communities, lack of capacity for local collective action. Thus, the public welfare must be relegated to the government, an attitude which has now also been adopted in the Islamic world. Historically, in Islamic societies, communities are united in purpose and hence action can be delegated to the community level. This is how social welfare was managed throughout the Islamic civilization for more than 1,000 years. The institutional and legal structure represents ethical and moral commitments of the society. Islam has a deep seated commitment to equality for all, not in terms of wealth but in terms of opportunities. We discuss this further by considering the following points: A. Equal opportunity for all. B. Waqf, zakah, and sadaqat. C. Guilds, service orientation, markets, and market regulation. D. Regulatory and legal framework. A. Equal opportunities, education, and jobs. As discussed earlier, a Muslim society has a collective responsibility for the basic needs of all its members, including health, education, food, housing, and provision of opportunities for employment. However, the mechanisms for achieving this goal differ radically from those of contemporary secularized market societies. Since secular societies are composed of individuals pursuing separate and conflicting goals, the only possible agent for collective action is the government. Accordingly, nearly all major social welfare activities are relegated to the government. In contrast, Islam makes the provision of basic needs a collective responsibility, fard al-kifaya, for society as a whole. This concept of collective responsibility has been listed by Sayyid Abdul Hasan Ali Nadvi, 1986, as among the important contributions that Islam has made towards civilization. Fard al-Kifaya creates an expanding circle of responsibilities for individuals and institutions, functions within a society. In the first instance, every individual is responsible to look after his own needs, his providing for his own person and for those who fall within his social responsibility, such as his family, elders, and other needy kinfolk, is regarded as a form of worship. To the extent that a particular family are capable to look after itself, it falls to the larger communities to look after them. All those with resources in excess to their needs are collectively responsible for those who do not have sufficient resources. The government is responsible as a last resort when combined community resources do not suffice for the task. A primary objective is the creation of goodwill and harmony in order to build a community. In addition, economic security also frees individuals to turn to higher spiritual and social pursuits. Two aspects of economic security deserves to be highlighted as they are the key to provision of equal opportunity, which is an integral component of Islamic society. These are education and labor. Education. Among the basic needs, education deserves special attention. It is the it is the route to equal opportunity. It also plays a special role because it is an excellent channel through which the collective responsibility of the state and citizens to provide for people's moral development can be fulfilled. Islamic teachings place extremely high importance on the education. Since providing education to the young is a collective responsibility of society, there was no concept of charging money for this. For all who desired it, education was freely available. This provided for equal opportunities for all in a way that has rarely been matched. A major source of poverty and inequality today is the lack of access to equal opportunities to education, both in Islamic societies and globally. Islamic countries have generally imitated capitalist models and failed to provide alternatives based on institutional structures from pre-colonial times. Even more important than the failure to provide equal educational opportunities is the failure to provide the right kind of education. In Islam, an education develops character, teaches social responsibilities, virtues, and trains the mind, heart, and soul. The missing spiritual dimension leads to lack of sympathy and the compassion, which is an important driver of poverty. Labor as worship. The Quran places extremely great value on human lives. Whosoever saves one life is as if he had saved the entire mankind. Quran, ayah 5-32. The moments of our lives are so precious that all the gold in the world would not suffice as ransom for one extra moment of prolongation of life. Given that lives cannot be bought or sold for money, Islamic methods for production of goods and utilization of labor are radically different from those of capitalist labor markets. In market societies, capitalists produce goods for the profits and purchase inputs for use in the production process. As Marx noted, time of the laborer is purchased just like other commodities and inputs used in the production process. This leads to alienation, where the laborer loses the right to control his life and destiny, entitlement to the goods he produces, and connections with society, and is denied the right to meaningful work. Marx, 1959. In principle, both according to economic theory and also according to how markets operate, he is an interchangeable part in the production process. Islam considers human lives as infinitely valuable, precious beyond the possibility of purchase, and unique. As specified by many scholars, it is self evident that in Islam the fundamental problem of man is not economic, and economic progress is not a goal or objective of life of the human. Shafi, 1979, page 4. In Holy Quran, Allah Almighty asks us to sell our lives and property to buy infinite reward of paradise. Quran 9-111. Contracts involving sale of significant portion of our lives for finite material gains on this earth make no sense. This perspective requires a radical reconceptualization of labor and its use for production of goods and services. In particular, man has been created only for the purpose of worship. Quran 51-56. So it follows that the only acceptable forms of labor must be performed as acts of worship. We now discuss how Islamic principles are used to accomplish this transformation. In line with the secondary status of economic activity in Islam, earning to support yourself and all for whom you are responsible is a religious duty, though it is of lesser priority than primary religious duties like the five pillars of Islam. Thus, if we work to feed ourselves and family, this is a form of worship. This Islamic concept of labor is differentiated from the compulsion to work out of economic necessity that is required for the function of capitalist societies in many important ways. The social goods, community, family, friends, sports, and socialization are free goods which require time and efforts not available due to pressure of keeping up with ever increasing standards of living. As a result, people in hospices express regrets over having neglected friends and family in the pursuit of career and wealth. Islamic firms are required to treat workers with dignity and respect, and equality maintained between employers and employees in terms of their social status, in particular clothing, housing, and food. Islamic theory sees the employer and employees as engaged in a cooperative enterprise to provide valuable goods and services to the society. Within this framework, all work becomes meaningful as it is a form of worship to provide service to human beings. Even a menial worker cleaning a mosque feels that he is making a valuable contribution to social welfare. Zakah, sadaqah, and awqaf. In order to impact the real world, the spirit of generosity, compassion, and responsibility, strongly embodied in the teachings of Islam, must be given concrete expression in the form of institutional structures for implementation. Most important among these structures are zakah, the obligatory charity, sadaqat, the voluntary charity, and awqaf, institutional charity for long-term purposes. One of the five pillars of Islam, zakah, is a means of self-purification for the wealthy and also institutional means for fulfilling our collective responsibilities toward the poor. Historically, it has been a powerful tool for the relief of poverty, whereas the spirit of capitalism is the accumulation of wealth. The Islamic spirit is to spend excess wealth on others. They ask thee how much they are to spend. Say what is beyond your needs. Quran 2-219. The Prophet, may the peace and blessings of Allah be upon him, recommended those with excess wealth to set up institutions which would devote revenues to specified charitable purposes, thereby earning rewards in perpetuity. Historically, awqaf were the central vehicle for provision of social welfare in Islamic societies. It is estimated that about one third of the land in the Ottoman Empire was devoted to such trusts. Kaf 1992, page 9. The awqaf formed the basis for a rich and vibrant civil society and shaped the urban space. A major part of the public environment in Islamic towns actually came into being as a result of endowment. Sate and Lim 2006 write that system of awqaf succeeded for centuries in Islamic lands in redistributing wealth, page 156, leading the equitable outcomes and the circulation of wealth in accordance with Quranic injunctions. In particular, these awqaf provided adequately for social needs on a community-centered and community-driven basis, to the extent that Ottoman Khalifas did not see themselves as being responsible for the provision of social services to the population. Thus, these institutions form a historically proven Islamic alternative to the current European welfare state model for providing the people needs. The Islamic methodology has two distinct advantages. The awqaf were locally based and managed. They had substantially more local information than state-run systems typically do and could therefore perform more efficiently. Islamic requirement that social institutions should inculcate a sense of responsibility, reinforce social ties, and increase social awareness was also fulfilled by this system. There is today widespread agreement among Muslims on the need to revive the institution of Waqf and give it the central importance that it had in the past. Islamic business model. Islam places great emphasis on the business as a means of earning a living. According to Hadith, the honest trader ranks with the martyrs, saints, and prophets. Al-Tirmizi 1975, 3-507, Hadith number 1209. This is because trade done according to Islamic principles is a triple act of worship. In standard Western model, the sole object of business is to make profits, and provision of service is a means to the goal. However, Islamic business models reverse this relationship. The goal of an Islamic business is to provide the service to the community, and the making of profit is a means to sustain this provision. When money is earned with the intention of spending it for the sake of Allah for any goal permissible in the Sharia, in obedience to the following verse of Quran, then it becomes an act of worship. But as for all who lay up the treasures of gold and silver and do not spend them for the sake of God. Give them the tiding of grievous suffering in the life to come. Quran 9-34. A Muslim businessman earns money to provide for his own and his family's needs, which is an act of worship. He also earns to provide jobs and providing both a service to the community and livelihood to the employees. In addition, the business itself provides products and services to human beings. This is an act of worship and source of blessings. According to Hadith, the provider of services or goods is blessed. Ibn Majah 2009 3-82 Hadith number 2154. Making service instead of profits the goal of business creates a model radically different from those currently being taught in MBA programs in leading universities and imitated globally. Western theories of the firm have taken a dramatically dangerous turn, allowing the search for corporate profits to destroy millions of lives and threatening to destroy the planet. The corporation has been granted autonomy, the same rights accorded to human beings, but no responsibilities. See Parkinson, 1995. The idea that human individuals have freedom of speech has been applied to provide corporations with the right to make arbitrarily high campaign contributions to the congressional representatives. See Epps 2011, effectively allowing them to bribe the government. Many authors have documented the stranglehold of corporate power over governments all over the world. Cotton 2015. Instead of the profit motive, Islam offers the service motive as the driving engine behind the firms. This leads to radical changes in the theory of the firm. Whereas profit making firms will pollute, cause environmental damage, lobby for sale of unsafe products and drugs, and charge extortionate prices for necessary products, service oriented firms will not engage in such behavior. The service motive turns the running of the firm into an act of worship, but also creates a heavy burden of responsibility not faced by the profit making firm. Legal and regulatory framework. The central theme of Polanyi 1944 is not that markets harm societies, but that unregulated markets cause massive damage to society. In this context, the institution of Hisbah for regulation of markets goes back to the Prophet Muhammad. May the peace and blessings of Allah be upon him. Economic theory recognizes damages to the society caused by profit seeking behavior of the firms and calls this market failure. In Islam, firms are discouraged from making from this kind of irresponsible behavior, and regulatory and legal mechanisms are created to ensure compliance. Nas 1999 gives a comprehensive survey of Hisbah, which includes a wide range of responsibilities for public welfare. This semi-judicial institution of Al-Hisbah, operational from the earliest days of Islam, is charged with the responsibility of setting conditions that preserve and enhance the public health and interest, protect the consumers, solve business and labor disputes, promote good market behavior, and ensure their observance. In the realm of marketplace, the Hisbah ensured that weights and measures were of official standard, provided stamps of equality, ensured that goods being sold were of standard quality by various means, took actions against false advertising, hoarding to increase prices, collusion, and monopolistic actions, and generally protected the public interest. Issues like pollution of rivers or environment also fall under the jurisdiction of the Hisbah. An examination of these different roles and their implementation in different periods of Islamic history is given in chapter 5 of Nas 1999. In areas where a few people can combine to act collectively and gain great benefits, they can take actions to damage the public interest. Where a large group, each of which suffers a small loss, cannot easily combine to protect their collective interest. This allows the 1% to exploit the 99% and is a source of great variety of loss and damage to the public. It exacerbates problems created by poverty. Islam provides an effective remedy in the form of an institution designed to protect the collective interests of the weak and oppressed. SDG 10 UNO targets by 2030 progressively achieve and sustain income growth of the bottom 40% of population at a rate higher than the national average. By 2030, empower and promote the social, economic, and political inclusion of all, irrespective of age, sex, disability, race, ethnicity, origin, religion, or economic or other status. Ensure equal opportunity and reduce inequalities of outcome, including through eliminating discriminatory laws, policies, and practices, and promoting appropriate legislation, policies, and actions in this regard. Adopt policies, especially fiscal, wage, and social protection policies, and progressively achieve greater equality. Improve regulation and monitoring of global financial markets and institutions, and strengthen implementation of such regulations. Ensure enhanced representation and voice of developing countries in decision making in global, international, economic, and financial institutions in order to deliver more effective, credible, accountable, and legitimate institutions. Facilitate orderly, safe, regular, and responsible migration and mobility of people, including through implementation of planned and well managed migration policies. Implement the principle of special and differential treatment for developing countries, in particular, least developed countries, in accordance with WTO agreements. Encourage ODA and financial flows, including foreign direct investment to states where the need is greatest, in particular LDCs, African countries, SIDS, and LLDCs in accordance with their national plans and programs. By 2030, reduce to less than 3% the transaction cost of migrant remittances and eliminate remittance corridors with costs higher than 5%. That concludes my today's talk, ladies and gentlemen. I'm profoundly thankful to all of you for listening to me as well as passing it on to others. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala grant you all what is best suited for you. Allah Hafiz, till next time.